Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up podcast. We have episode 21 right now. We've had a little bit of a hiatus, but with the NFL season coming back, we'll be back on here every single week to talk about the NFL. Obviously, once the NBA starts back up, we'll be talking about that. And I'm your host, Brandon Crowley. I'm here with my co-host, Colin Martin.
How's it going?
We're doing good today. Happy to be back. Like I said, with the NFL coming back, with our college football predictions and everything going on, with our other series that runs weekly, this will just be everything basically besides that that's going on with the NFL, the NBA, anything else we really want to talk about. When the MLB playoffs come in, we can start sprinkling a little bit of that going on. But just for this week and the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about the NFL since it's coming back. It's on everyone's mind right now. And just kicking it off, we're going to start off with a Thursday night game. The Chiefs taking on the Lions in a very good game. Obviously, coming down to the wire, there were some big players that weren't playing in that game, Travis Kelce and Chris Jones. But the Lions coming into this game, both of us had high expectations for them this season. If you guys haven't watched our full NFL season predictions yet, not to spoil that, but we do think they're going to go pretty far this year. The Chiefs, too. I thought they're going to go far. This game, though, week one, doesn't mean as much as the rest of the season, but it does show that both of these teams are going to be good this year, in my opinion. So starting off with the Lions winning this by 1 point, what's your main takeaway from this game overall?
Yeah, and I think the big question is if the Chiefs are really in trouble or not. And to be honest, I do worry a little bit. I think we both expected the Chiefs to start the season out hot, and when they lose in week one, that's obviously a pretty bad start. Obviously, the Lions played a really good game, but to focus on Kansas City, the lack of receiving weapons has become something that Mahomes has overcome in the last couple seasons ever since Tyreek Hill left. But if Kelce continues to struggle with injury, that's going to be a huge issue going forward. I mean, we both like Sky Moore. Kadarius Toney is obviously a name that's been talked about a lot, but we expect him to play a little bit better than this week to week. So those are guys that are supposed to step up, but at some point they just have to do it. For the Lions, especially, I love seeing Jared Goff go out there and just play his game. And I was really, really impressed at their running attack. I'm going to be honest, the numbers don't look exceptional, but it feels like they didn't even really unleash Jahmyr Gibbs. But in his few snaps that he did get, he looked really good. I think the Lions came out. We expect their defense to be top tier. We expect them to have a good offensive line. And especially with the Chiefs missing Chris Jones week one because of the whole contract issue, their offensive line stood up and they played really well. So I worry a little bit about the Chiefs, and there's a lot to be said about this Lions team that I think it's going to convert going forward. But to kind of switch the question back to you, do you think Kansas City is really in trouble?
Yeah, well, going into this, like we said in our predictions for the season, Patrick Mahomes essentially is going out here with guys who on any other team, I mean, guys like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who we saw in Green Bay, the third option for that team for a while. Guys like Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, all like third or fourth options, and these are the guys who are going to be playing with Patrick Mahomes this season. And I think I'm not too worried about it at this point, especially going against the Lions, who I think are a good, scrappy team, and they took advantage when they needed to. There was a lot of drop passes, obviously, from Kadarius Toney. There was a stat that came up that now he's tied with every single player last season who played a full season for the amount of drops, which is not a good stat to have. And going for the rest of this season, I'm not a big Kadarius Toney fan. Obviously, he's his whole personality at this point is just making fun of the Giants for some reason. And even though he has a Giants tattoo on him, which is kind of awkward at this point. But I mean, the rest of this team, I like Justin Watson. I like Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I think Noah Gray is a good backup tight end. And a lot of these guys are good in certain instances. So I think this team will be fine, especially with Patrick Mahomes. I think you give this roster of receivers to like 85% of the quarterbacks, and it's not going to be as good. But you give it to the top end guys, I think they'll be able to figure it out. And it's the same argument with quarterbacks. As long as we've seen the argument for the best quarterbacks of all time, I think the best quarterbacks make the bad receivers look even better. And that's why some of these receivers look better in the limelight. I think they'll figure it out, especially with Travis Kelce coming back, that even if you don't throw him the ball every play, it starts to get guys more wide open, and then it puts less pressure on the offense. They didn't really get the running attack going that well. Isaiah Pacheco, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who had a decent game, I mean, running and receiving. Both of those guys only combined for 14 rushes, which is still 7 less than David Montgomery by himself. And it seemed like you said, the Lions didn't even completely unleash that running attack. So I think the team will be fine. Chris Jones coming back next week. Travis Kelce, I would assume if he doesn't play this weekend, plays the week after. So it is going to be a tough test against the Jaguars, but I do think they're fine in this instance. But overall, I mean, flipping to the other side, like we've both talked about a little bit, I do think the Lions are going to be good this season. And do you think this showing really proves that they are contenders?
Yeah, and I'm glad we're coming back to this because I do want to talk about this Lions team a little bit more. Just looking at their schedule going forward, they're coming up on the Seahawks, who disappointed, who we'll talk about later, the Falcons, the Packers, and the Panthers. I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say I think they at least split those games. And at that point, they're 3-2 post week 5. And that doesn't seem like a big deal. It doesn't seem exceptional, but it's better than Detroit's been in a long time. And this is kind of just what we expect now. I mean, Dan Campbell has come in, they have new management, and they've really put together a competent squad, which is really better than anything we can say since early Matt Stafford, Calvin Johnson days. I mean, if they convert over that stretch that I just mentioned, I think they're probably going to roll into the postseason looking to compete. And with a team like the Lions, who's young, they're hungry, kind of like a team like the Jaguars last year, they may not come in as favorites or anything. So I know people won't throw around the word contenders, but with teams like that in the playoffs, they have a lot to play for and not a lot to lose at that point. So I think teams with that level of energy, that level of hunger, and really any team in the playoffs coached by a guy like Dan Campbell, I'm willing to call a contender because you really never know what could happen. I think Detroit does have bigger issues to address. I love Jared Goff as a player, but eventually they're going to get to a point where they might need to address quarterback. Luckily for Detroit, that's not this year. I really like the Lions getting that week 1 win against Kansas City. At the end of the day, it's a long season. It's only one game. But if you ask Campbell, I guarantee this is the one game he really wanted to win the most. It's the most important to come out strong. And as we see guys like Gibbs, who we've mentioned, like Amon-Ra, who's supposed to have a big year, and guys on that defensive side that have a lot to prove, continue to ball out this year, I really like Detroit. I don't think it's unreasonable to say they might be a pretty solid seed in the playoffs. And if they have a game at home, I really can't see them losing. It's early, but I think the Lions could be contenders this year.
Yeah, and that whole receiving core between Josh Reynolds, Amon-Ra St. Brown, even Sam Laporta, who I was very impressed with. And even on the defensive side, Brian Branch obviously had that 50-yard pick six off of Kadarius Toney's hands. He was one of my favorite players going into this draft overall. The one thing that we weren't really sure where he would get drafted just because of the need with safety, but he goes out there in his first NFL game and gets a 50-yard pick six. That's probably the best possible start that you could get playing at a safety position, especially against Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he's going to keep that game ball. I guarantee that. And even on the defensive side with guys like CJ Gardner-Johnson, who's going to make a big impact for them this year. Jack Campbell, who played decent. And I mean, you have a lot of good guys out there who I'm excited to see on the defense and the offensive side too. I think this team is going to be solid. Like you said, I mean, worst case scenario, they split over this next stretch, but they're coming up on teams that disappointed in week 1. And I think this Lions team getting that win in week 1 is massive for them. This may not hurt them. Like the Chiefs overall, I think they'll be able to bounce back. But for the Lions, it is a very big boost for them just to get that week 1 win over the defending champions. And going into next week, I think they're going to be able to come out on top just because this offense is already built very well. Jared Goff, like we had in our preseason quarterback rankings, we gave him the label of a game manager, which a lot of people think is a bad thing, but you can be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL and be a game manager. If you just do what you need to do to win the game, especially at the quarterback position, like Jared Goff did, that's all you need. You may have to address the quarterback situation, but you don't have to this year if Jared Goff can stay and perform like he did and do everything he needs to do, especially when you can lean on the run game overall. I think this Lions team is in for a good season, especially in the division where there's a lot up in the air.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of another division where a lot is up in the air, we definitely want to talk about the AFC North here. We saw the Bengals play the Browns. We saw the Steelers fall off. We saw the Ravens win in kind of a gritty game. So I think the big question, we both had the Bengals in our season predictions, but now we've actually seen all these squads play. Who do you think comes out of the AFC North?
I'm still going to give it to the Bengals. Going into this game, I think the Browns completely dominated them. There was a lot going on between Joe Burrow and just him playing in the rain, and that defense from the Browns, who I think is very underrated. I think it is very, I mean, pretty much close to one of the best defenses in the league. A lot of young guys, but when you have a guy like Myles Garrett on your edge, it is very hard, almost impossible to block him, like we saw in that game. And Cleveland went out and got the gritty win. But like we've seen, I think a lot of people forget that Joe Burrow just hasn't been able to beat the Browns. They just always have their number. But I think the Bengals are still going to come away with this division. Despite that loss, I think Joe Burrow is going to come back. He may not have a fantastic year overall. It may take him a little while to figure it out, which is completely fine. I mean, going into this week, obviously, we saw pretty much every quarterback who got a lot of money struggle, namely Joe Burrow, Daniel Jones, a lot of those guys who's got the big contracts. But Deshaun Watson on the other end went out and played well. Obviously, Nick Chubb with over 100 yards. Like we've said before, he can go out and win a game by himself, and 100 yards, especially on the ground, is going to help you win by a lot. Deshaun Watson with almost 50 yards on the ground and a rushing touchdown. I think the Browns are going to be very competitive this year, and I don't think they're going to win the division, but we've talked about this division before, and there's a lot of teams who have potential to get up there, and I think the Browns have the potential to even finish second. The Ravens didn't amaze me. I do hope Lamar Jackson can bounce back from that game. He didn't look like the normal Lamar Jackson that we've seen, but the passing attack with Zay Flowers getting 80 yards receiving and getting a few rushes too, close to 90 all-purpose yards. A very good game for him, and I was big on him going into this year. So great to see him thrive, but I still do give it to the Bengals. But like we've said, it is going to come down to these division matchups, and it's going to be a very competitive division this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no questioning that I'm still going to roll with the Bengals here. But with that being said, I really want to talk about this Browns team because we give a lot of credit to Deshaun Watson, who I'll talk a little bit more about later, and Nick Chubb deservingly. But their defense is what really shined here. I mean, Joe Burrow didn't look his best, but that was in a big part because Cleveland's defense came out firing. Everyone knows about Myles Garrett, but I really want to mention guys like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and especially this game, Grant Delpit. I mean, it's early, so PFF grades can be kind of weird, but, you know, he's top 3 right now in safety PFF grades, and that's because he just played an incredible game. Grant Delpit is a name we talk about a lot, but I don't really think we see him perform at like really top tier level. So seeing that after week 1 was really encouraging to me. If the Browns are going to be a dark horse team to win this division, it's going to be because of that defense. Chubb and, you know, the receivers and everything else on that offense, the O-line especially, you know, they're great. Don't get me wrong. It's a good squad they built up, but that defense is what wins you games. I know that's an old saying, but in a case with the Cleveland Browns, it really is true. I'm still going to roll with the Bengals, though. I'm not totally bought in on Deshaun Watson. I know the box score looks good, but he kind of had his moments where I wasn't super impressed. I'm still iffy on him. We'll have to wait and see. But I think Burrow and Mixon both bounced back a little bit. They just made the game too easy for Cleveland. And I think a lot of that Bengals offense, their struggles came from Joe Burrow missing most of the offseason. You know, he was hurt. He had the injury problems, and he's A-okay to go now. We obviously got a big contract, but when you miss, you know, reps in the preseason, you're missing practice, you're going to be off with some of your best players. And we know he has a great connection with Jamar Chase, you know, Tyler Boyd, guys like T. Higgins, you know, these are guys that he usually is locked in with, and he just didn't look that way. He barely even threw T. Higgins the ball, which is not like him at all. And I think those things will figure themselves out. I know it kind of sounds like we're being Bengals believers right now, but I mean, we've seen the success in the past, and I predict Joe Burrow to have a really big year. So obviously a little discouraged after week 1, but I'm not getting off the train yet. I think it's a really good squad. I think the Browns just have their number. And as you mentioned, that's not something new. That's kind of been every game since the Joe Burrow era in Cincinnati. So I think it's going to be super competitive. I think we might not have given the Browns a fair shake in our original predictions. It's a really good squad. So there's going to be a lot of shakeup, but I'm still rolling with the Bengals.
Yeah, and I think the most interesting thing overall from this weekend, the Steelers losing 30-7, I'm not that surprised about, but Kenny Pickett throwing 46 pass attempts and then them only running the ball with Najee Harris 6 times, only 10 rushes overall. Very surprised to see that, especially because the Steelers bought in very heavily on Najee Harris, and I really liked him coming out of college, but it just seems like everything's falling off for Najee Harris at this point, especially for this team overall. And with potential injuries to that receiving room, we're not really sure what's going to happen with some of these guys. Guys like Allen Robinson and Calvin Austin, I mean, they're solid players overall, but you definitely want to start picking up the ball with George Pickens. He only had 5 receptions that game. I think you need to start going to him a little more, especially if you're going to throw the ball 46 times overall. I know they split the receptions a little bit across these guys, but if you want to be successful this season, you're going to have to start implementing that run. And it seems like they're not really trusting Najee Harris if he only had 6 carries in that whole game. I know the San Francisco defense is really good, but if you pass the ball every single play, then you're not going to be able to compete against teams throughout the whole season, especially if you have Kenny Pickett at quarterback. I don't think he's bad, but he's not a guy that can go out there and throw 46 times a game and you can go out there and win. You have to mix in the running game overall, like we saw. Christian McCaffrey is obviously one of the best running backs in the NFL, but even giving him 22 carries, that opens up the passing game more. So, I mean, we'll have to see something different from Pittsburgh if they go back next week. And I mean, they did get beat by a lot, but I don't think that discourages them too much. They're going to go against the Browns, and division matchups are always hard. And that Browns defense is very good too, like we just talked about. So it'll be interesting to see how they play against them. And if the Browns can continue to be great on the ground defensively, then it's going to be a very big game for them. But this is kind of a bounce back game for the Steelers, because if you go 0-2, and especially against this Browns team who is very good this season, if you lose by a lot, then you have a lot to worry about after these 2 weeks.
Yeah, Banning, and I've never agreed with you more. I think you're right on the money. The Steelers need to rush the ball. I don't even care if it's with Najee Harris or not. If the Steelers have given up on Najee, then whatever. It was a bad decision a couple years ago. You figure it out. You at least have to get Jaylen Warren involved. Only 9 combined rushes from your 2 lead backs is absolutely embarrassing. If you include one Kenny Pickett scramble, that's only 10 rush attempts the whole game. I know the 49ers rush defense is really, really good. I know they make it tough, but I really don't care. You have to do it, because if you get any quarterback throwing 46 times a game, it gets dangerous. Those are games you usually don't win. You know, it's a risk to put the ball in the air, especially if you have a quarterback that struggles with turnovers at times, and that's Kenny Pickett. I want Kenny Pickett to succeed really bad. I think he has the tools to succeed, and I just really hope the Steelers, I want to say smarten up and give him a chance to do that, because if you have him throwing the ball close to 50 times a game, defenses are going to figure him out really, really quick. And that's just not the game Pickett's meant to play. It's not how he played at Pitt. It's not how he played his rookie year, and it can't be how he plays now. I don't care if it's Najee. I don't care if it's Jaylen Warren. Run the ball. It doesn't matter if you lose to the 49ers by a ton, because they threw the ball a ton and lost to them anyways. It gets to a point where it's almost embarrassing. Steelers fans and the Steelers themselves talked a lot going into this game. I know Patrick Peterson especially, was talking bad about Brock Purdy, and Brock Purdy pieced up your defense and your offense came out flat. I think the Steelers still have a lot of really good things going on over there, but especially with Deontay Johnson looking like he's going to miss a significant chunk of time, almost up to a month, then you have to get the run game going. If you don't start now, it's never going to happen. And this isn't basketball or baseball. If you don't get stuff going within the first month, you're kind of sunk, and the Steelers need to start it now. I think that Browns game is going to be really big. Again, tough defense, but it's a divisional rival against a team that, is gritty. You have to run the ball against them. It's not something that I like to see, and the Steelers need to do it now more than later.
Yeah. And that division is going to be competitive, but going on to a team who did run the ball a lot, the Rams beat the Seahawks by a lot. I know both of us predicted the Seahawks to win this game. I don't know if we had that anywhere officially, but that was our pick in the keeper leagues, just because the overall team that was built with the Rams this season just wasn't that great. But they went out there and they surprised pretty much everyone. I don't think anyone really came into this game expecting that to be the outcome. I didn't think the Seahawks were going to be that great this season, but I didn't expect the Rams to rout them like that. They ran the ball 40 times overall, and Cam Akers had 22 rushes, and he didn't even start running the ball until the second half. Kyron Williams only had 15 carries, but he did have a lot more yards than Cam Akers, so we can talk about that a little bit. Matthew Stafford, though, with 334 passing yards, he just threw the ball across the field to guys like Tutu Atwell. And even, we saw 24 receptions between that room overall, and some guys that if you go through this whole entire receiving core in general, a lot of these guys, people had no idea who they were before this week, and I don't blame them. These were guys who barely even made the roster, but came out here and performed in week one, and that's all that mattered at the end of the day. I mean, the Seahawks, obviously, they have a good receiving room with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, who they got this year. But the Rams went out there and they threw the ball, they ran the ball, they had the defense come up big when they needed to, and they came out with a big win this week. So, do you think they're back, or do you think this is just a little bit of a fluke victory?
Yeah, I mean, first off, it would be impossible to mention this game without talking about Puka Nakoa, I think, and Tutu Atwell. I mean, they just both had incredible games. You mentioned Kyron Williams, who was really solid in the ground game. But with that being said, I don't know if this team just has enough talent to perform weekly. They looked really good, and they might be a little bit more streaky good than I gave them credit. But I just think they came out stronger than Seattle in the second half. And I think that says more about Seattle than it does about Los Angeles. Unfortunately, Geno Smith was super disappointing, and the Seattle secondary was kind of the big thing that worries me. That was a function of their game that was really, really good last year. Obviously, Tariq Woolen was a big name back there, but they just gave Stafford way too much to work with. They need to figure out that defensive side of the ball if they're serious about competing, because you just can't bank on Woolen to compete as he did last year. He was kind of a dude that surprised a lot of us. But I guess more specifically about the Rams, I think they have pieces. Matt Stafford obviously brought him to a Super Bowl victory. You know, that doesn't come by accident. He might go down as one of the most underrated quarterbacks ever. He just doesn't have the pieces right now. At the end of the day, the offensive line scares me. The defense scares me, especially if we see Donald struggle at any point, which I don't expect, but obviously could happen. They have so many issues and so many holes left to fill up. I think they're just too far away. Their timeline doesn't make sense to compete right now. But getting a week one victory is, going to change how some people perceive the team. And I don't think Seattle respected their opponent enough. If the Seahawks want to compete, like I think they will, I know you don't think they will. That's definitely something that's not looking great right now. They need to just do more. I think the Rams came out looking great. And if that receiving core with Tutu and Nakua is actually legit, then they just got two steals out of the woodworks, because I know neither of us saw that coming. I know a lot of people didn't. So I really want to see them continue to perform. That would be a really cool storyline.
Yeah, and this Rams team, like you said, they can be streaky throughout the year, especially with a guy like Matthew Stafford. He can go out there and give you 300 or 400 yards. And coming into this season, I mean, this team just wasn't that great on paper, but if they can have guys that can come out here and perform, especially in that receiving room and just overall in the defense, obviously Aaron Donald is going to get double teamed every single play. So it's going to be big for other guys on that defense to be able to go out there and get some pressure too. I don't think this really spells the overall division win for the Rams. I think obviously the 49ers have that wrapped up at this point, but it is going to make the division a little more interesting because obviously a team has to come in second, and Arizona I think is going to be at the bottom and San Francisco is going to be at the top. I don't see anything changing between that, but between Los Angeles and Seattle, I think it could be competitive for that second spot and kind of building up a little bit of more momentum. Another team though, going into this week that we saw the Dolphins come away with a 2-point win over the Chargers, but it seemed like a lot more than that. I mean, this team overall, Tua went out there, almost had 470 yards and 3 touchdowns. Tyreek Hill, 215 yards and 2 touchdowns in the air. This game, both of these teams, we knew they were going to throw the ball a lot just because the way that these teams were built. On one side, you have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and a bunch of other solid guys. And then you have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Quentin Johnston, too, on the other side. So we knew we were going to get a big game, and it did not disappoint overall. Tua going out there and slinging the ball, outslinging Justin Herbert in this instant. And it was a great game overall. I do want to know, do you think this gives you a little bit more hope on the Dolphins this year and Tua overall?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm a Tua supporter, but I didn't see a lot coming from the Dolphins this year. And I think I might have been wrong. It's early, so I won't say I am wrong yet in case something changes. But they just looked really, really good out there. The Chargers secondary is just horrible. I want to be nice to them because their offense played really great last week. But the corners just weren't getting anything done. J.C. Jackson got burnt over and over again. And I do want to give credit to Tyreek Hill there. As we mentioned, an incredible game, 215 yards, 2 touchdowns. PFF just has him at an exceptional score just because he really is. I don't know. You could argue he's the best receiver in football right now. The way he gets separation is really interesting. Obviously, he's a shorter guy. He's not going to be a jump ball receiver. And Tua has gotten flack in the past for not being incredibly accurate. But Tyreek Hill just is so fast that he gets the separation, and Tua puts the ball in the right place every time. I think Tyreek Hill, I expect him to be this incredible player. Tua, like, really impressed me. I thought he looked really, really good out there. And we'll talk about the Jets later, of course, with all the news that's been going on over there. But with them presumably taking a step back, if you tell me the Dolphins are pushing for a playoff spot, I wouldn't be surprised at all. We saw the Bills go down week 1, 2. It's early. They're a team that will probably compete for that first spot. But if the Dolphins' offense is really as electric as we just saw, and they have a defense that I expect to step up, especially in the run game with Christian Wilkins, who's probably the best run defender in all of football right now, they're really serious. So, I mean, I'm going to pose you the same question. How far do you think the Dolphins could really go?
Yeah, and I think this Dolphins team is solid. Tyreek Hill obviously was balling that game, so they kept giving him the ball. But as the season continues, he's going to start getting double teamed, especially with a high safety. But that opens up the game for Jalen Waddle a little more. I'm not a huge believer in this rushing team overall. Raheem Mostert, I think, is a decent running back, but besides that, you don't really have anything else. So that might be where this team kind of falls a little bit short. I could see them definitely getting a playoff spot. And especially going into this game, they're very aggressive. And that's going to work when you have guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Tua out there. But that could be their downfall too. When you're an aggressive team like that, you can either put up a lot of points or it can come back and bite you. And I think that's what is going to be kind of just the overall arching theme of the season for the Dolphins. This team is going to go out there and they're going to play aggressive. And sometimes that might come away with 50 points. And sometimes that might come away with 3 or 4 interceptions or fumbles from this team. So I think they just have to limit those mistakes. If they're going to continue to play aggressive, I think that's great for them. I think that'll help them overall, especially in the division that they're in when they're playing against teams like the Bills, who obviously didn't play that great this week, but they're still a high-powered team overall. So I think it'll be interesting. I could see the Dolphins kind of getting into that overall end of the wild card spot, maybe the 5, 6, or 7 seed. I could see them sneaking in, but as of right now, I would want to see a little bit more if I'm going to give a prediction. But I think Tyreek Hill, every single season, he has one of those games where people see how great of a receiver he is, and people kind of forget that he is one of the best, if not the best, overall playmaker in the NFL. And this was definitely one of them. It's great to see that come in week 1. And it's always exciting. I don't think anyone's ever watched a Tyreek Hill game like this where he gets 200 yards. And unless you're a fan of the other team, you get mad by it. But it's just always exciting to see Tyreek Hill have these big games.
Yeah, for sure. And Benning, I hate to do this to you, but it is time to talk about it. They call it the Big Blue Disaster. The Giants lose the home opener 40-0. If you guys are new to the channel, Benning, obviously a big Giants fan. So I'm going to pose you the question, just kind of let you go. What went wrong?
I think the main thing that went wrong going into that first drive, starting from the beginning of the game, the Giants kept running the ball. They kept throwing the ball when they needed to. And that was the best first drive that I've seen from a team in a while. And then it all goes down after that. John Michael Schmitz throws the ball into the ground, and that ends up with a field goal. Obviously, that gets blocked. And after that, that's just when the momentum completely went away. This team overall, I'm not going to blame Daniel Jones just because he had probably less than a second to throw the ball every single time. This whole offense overall, Saquon Barkley ended up with 50 yards, but it doesn't really matter in the end when you lose 40-0. I mean, it was pretty bad at halftime. Even though the score was only 26-0, it felt a lot worse than that. This felt like a college game where one team was just completely dominating. And the Cowboys are a solid team overall. I think if you're the Giants, you're in the scenario now where it can't possibly get any worse. So you get that out of the way. I think it's good that if this was to happen at any point in the season, you want this to happen at the beginning, and then you go address everything that went wrong. I think you have to start with the offensive line. I don't really know what you do at this point with the offensive line, just because it seems like you've put so much into it at this point. And obviously you have solid guys, but There's a lot of guys. John Michael Schmidt's obviously in his first season. He may not be the best, especially with linemen that we've seen. They usually don't excel in their first season. Evan Neal did not look good, and he's continuing to disappoint this team. Hopefully, they can come back and get a bounce back win, but this team overall just looked bad. I'm not going to blame Daniel Jones or Saquon Barkley just because at the end of the day, if you don't have any time to run or throw the ball, you can't really do much with it. The defense overall, I mean, they looked all right. Like I said before, the main issue that I was going to have was with the secondary. Xavier McKinney looked good, but besides that, there wasn't really much going on. Micah McFadden was good, but I think going into the Arizona next week, that's going to be a big game for them. Obviously, they should come away with a win. And if you're Brian Dable at that point, I think you have to throw everything you can into next game. And you got to go out there and make a big statement. You got to go out there and win by at least 10 or 10 points or even 2 touchdowns or more, especially against this Cardinals team that you should beat up on. And you have to build the confidence back after this point. They're going to see Dallas again towards the later part of this season. So it's not like you're going to run away from Dallas. And if you want to be competitive this season, I think you get this loss out of the way. And I still think they can be competitive. They just have to go back to the drawing board, and you have to come out against Carolina and win that game very big.
Yeah. And just on the other side of that coin, I think a lot of people now are talking about the Cowboys being the favorite in the NFC. And after watching the game, the boys might not be the favorite, but they did look really, really good. Obviously, we can talk about the Giants' miscues, but talking about what the Cowboys did well, their defense was going all night long. I mean, getting 7 sacks is impressive against, a high school offensive line, and holding the Giants to less than 30% on their third down conversions is really, really good, especially because the Giants had a lot of third down opportunities. If the Cowboys defense could work at a high level, I think you have to consider them a contender. And in the NFC East, where obviously they're fighting with the Giants, I wouldn't say they're fighting with the Commanders, but they're there. And then they have a big matchup with the Eagles that's probably going to, be close all season long. There's a lot to be said about this Cowboys team. They're a team like Texas in college football. We wonder if they're back every year. And it seems like they have years where they're really, really successful and then just can't pull it off in the playoffs. So, I mean, with that being said, it's a little bit of a touchy subject, but I do want to ask you, do you think the Cowboys are actually in a spot where they can compete for the Super Bowl this year, or is this kind of just another nothing burger like we've been getting from Dallas in the past?
It's going to take a lot for this team to actually convince me. Going into this game, obviously they won 40-0. It was on the back of the defense and the special teams overall. Tony Pollard had a really good game. Dak Prescott didn't really do much. He didn't need to, so I'm not really going to knock him there. But overall, this team, I mean, they had their big win, so I guess the hype builds up again. I do still think that everything's probably going to come crashing down at some point. They do have the Jets next week, which with a healthy Aaron Rodgers, I think that's a completely different game, but we'll talk about it a little bit later. The Jets still won that game this week. I don't think it's going to be as competitive as it would have been before, but starting off the season, Jets, Cardinals, Patriots, you should honestly, if this team is as good as they are, they should go out and win all those games. Then you have a real test against the 49ers. I think that's where the real Cowboys are going to show. They struggle every single year against the 49ers. They've lost in the playoffs to them the past few years. So unless they can come out, even if they come out 0-4, 4-0 to that point, I think I'm not going to start believing until I see that 49ers game, because if they go in there and they drop nothing, then I think this team is back to the point where the hype builds up every year and then they lose in the first round. I'm not completely bought in on Dak Prescott. I know he didn't throw any picks that game, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some games where he starts throwing 2 or 3 interceptions again. So I'm not buying the Dallas hype right now. It's going to take a lot for me too, just because they are Dallas and a division rival, but I'll give them the credit where it's due. That defense, Tony Pollard and the special teams played well overall, and they got the big win. So I guess that builds some momentum for them, and they should come out 4-0 in these first 4 games, but we'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if they go out and lose 2 of them.
Yeah. And that's going to bring us to our next topic, which, is probably the one that's on everyone's mind right now. And that's the New York Jets. Obviously had a big Monday Night Football game against the Bills, but the big storyline is Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers was the biggest acquisition out of any team all offseason, obviously multiple-time MVP, coming to the New York Jets, and it was really exciting. We were both really bought in on the hype after a long offseason, and only gets a couple plays under his belt before it doesn't seem like he's going to suit up for the Jets again this year. So they still won the game against the Bills. I definitely want to talk about that a little bit, but what do we foresee in this Jets season? Because that's obviously going to be a huge hit.
Yeah, and overall, I mean, I've come on here before with our NFL predictions. I had the Jets winning a lot of games this year, and I had Aaron Rodgers in the MVP conversation. And I've never been a big fan of Aaron Rodgers before. Throughout watching football, especially for the Packers, I never liked Aaron Rodgers, but going into this game, it was, I don't know, it just felt different when he got to the Jets and he was really bought in with the team, and it was exciting to see. A lot of people weren't very excited for Aaron Rodgers when he first got there just because they weren't really sure how he was going to work with the young guys, but he bought in and he made the whole fan base believe. The young players bought in on him. So obviously it's devastating to see, even if you're not a Jets fan, to see Aaron Rodgers get hurt on that first play, especially after building this team up so much. The hype was there, so much that he put into this. He was thinking about retiring. So, I mean, obviously coming back, this was a big thing for him. But this offense overall, I mean, Zach Wilson played essentially the whole entire game, and he did have an interception, but besides that, he went out there and he was a game manager, and the team won the game. It was on the backs of the running backs and the defense, but like I've said before, with this team overall, the defense and the running game can win you a game. I do think personally they should stick with Zach Wilson. I do think obviously at some point they'll have to sign a backup quarterback, but I think you still let Zach Wilson ball at this point until something happens. I don't think you give up on him. And obviously, if he starts playing bad, then you can start dealing with things. But I mean, what we've seen from the whole entire team overall, everything we've heard coming out from them, they're believing in Zach Wilson. So I think you got to give him a chance.
Yeah, and I mean overall, the Jets seem like they just can't catch a break. But we projected high things, big standards for the Jets this year. But that wasn't only because of Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, that was a big help, but they were a team for the last couple of years we really just thought was a quarterback away. We thought it would be Zach Wilson. It wasn't, but I mean, what's to say it couldn't be now? Because they have one of the best defenses in the league, if not the best. They have a good receiving core, obviously highlighted by Garrett Wilson, who just looks better and better every game. And what should be a really dynamic running back duo. We didn't see a lot from Cook, but it's early. He didn't get a full offseason under his belt. Breece Hall obviously had a really big run and a couple other, solid ones throughout the game. But, they have a lot to work with. We projected them highly for good reason. Aaron Rodgers would have been a huge help. But with Zach Wilson, I mean, he's had good pieces around him through his career, but I think we're looking at the best team that has ever been assembled. It wasn't assembled for him, but it's the best team that he could realistically step into at this point in his career. I completely agree. Give him a couple games at least. It's time for him to show what he can do. I know he's had opportunities in the past, but if you go out and you trade for a guy like Tannehill or Jameis Winston, or you sign guys like Andy Dalton that are hanging around, or any of those vets in free agency, all it's doing is shooting yourself in the foot in a way. Because if you have Zach Wilson, you remain a team with a really high ceiling. It just makes the floor go a lot lower. If you get a guy like Andy Dalton and realistically expect him to start games, I get that he can game manage, but that team's not competing for a Super Bowl. With Zach Wilson, who's to say? I don't think so. I'm sure a lot of people don't think so. But in the best case scenario, there's still a crazy high ceiling that would be really fun to see work out. And if you go and get a bridge guy like that, I just don't think it does it for you. If you're bringing a guy like that to be a backup, or, in case everything goes wrong with Zach Wilson, obviously you're going to have to do something like that. So the Jets are in a spot that is tough, but I would love to see Zach Wilson come in and revitalize his career. And that's coming from me. If you guys don't know, Banning's been the Zach Wilson guy, just in terms of liking him and being a fan, and I haven't. But it would be so cool to see Zach Wilson get all this hate and be put in the NFL bust category and then come out and actually do something. So at this point, I just like to see it happen. The Jets obviously are going to be in a weird spot. The Bills need to capitalize on this. The Bills losing this game was something that's not being talked about enough because of the Rodgers injury. It was really disappointing. Josh Allen played really bad, but if you're a team in the AFC East, Bills, Dolphins, Patriots, you need to jump on this before the Jets actually figure it out and stay competing.
Yeah, and I think the main thing with Zach Wilson going into this is I would say that there's less pressure in this scenario than he had before. Before, He was supposed to be the guy that would rebuild the Jets with that number 2 overall pick. He was the guy who was going to bring back this franchise. And obviously, it didn't work out in the first few years. But now the team is built up, and he's going into a scenario where no one thinks he's going to succeed, where before everyone was banking on him to succeed. And before, I mean, obviously, the system was different. This might be the thing. Now that the system is built around Aaron Rodgers, obviously Aaron Rodgers isn't going to play, but a system change is sometimes all a quarterback needs. And we've seen that before. And I think Zach Wilson, like I said, you still got to give him a chance. The Cowboys are going to be a tough matchup this week, but if he can go out there and play well, I mean, these teams are, I know a lot of people are very high on the Cowboys, but the Jets team is built very well. So if Zach Wilson can go out there, I don't think he's going to play as good as Dak Prescott. But when you have a guy like Andy Dalton, whoever you want to go sign, Nick Foles, your ceiling is you can be a mid-level team, maybe even still make the playoffs with a guy like that. But Zach Wilson is still so young, and he still has that untapped potential where his ceiling can still be higher. And if he can figure it out and he can come out and finally get it together and get the offense clicking, he could be your quarterback of the future still because he's still on that rookie contract. So I think you do take it and you ride him until the wheels come off. And I think that's fine, especially with this team, the way that it's built. But like you said, I don't think people are talking enough about this Bills team. The Bills team overall has been in this weird spot the past few years where they've been good enough to compete for an AFC championship. They just haven't been able to get to the Super Bowl. And Josh Allen, obviously not having a good game last game, 4 turnovers overall, and the team just absolutely folding when they had big chances to go out there, especially with Aaron Rodgers losing, going out and losing his whole season within the first pass attempt. That was the sign where a lot of people were like, okay, the Bills are going to dominate this game, but the Jets stay in it. They play gritty. And the Bills overall, I mean, we've obviously seen issues with Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen. Stephon Diggs wanting out. I wouldn't be surprised if this team continues to unravel and he wants out. But there's a lot of questions, especially with Josh Allen. We've talked about it before. He's been on that top 5, top 3 area for quarterback. But if he continues to play like this, I don't know what's going to happen with him because he's a guy that has a lot of high upside, but his ceiling and his floor, there's still a lot of room for that floor. We saw in his first few years where before he really knew how to throw a football, he could throw it far. He just didn't have the accuracy. And if he starts to go back to this, I just haven't really been impressed with him overall. And this team, I mean, obviously they have some easy wins coming up. The Raiders and the Commanders, I think they're better than both of those teams. But if they continue to struggle, then there's going to be a lot of questions around this team.
Yeah, and just to kind of summarize the division in a way, I mean, the AFC East is historically, in the last 20 years, one that's been dominated by New England's, but really it's anyone's division right now. And I know that seems wild to say because the Bills in the last couple of years have looked so much better than everyone else, but I really think you're going down the right direction because if Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen's relationship keeps getting worse and worse, one's got to go, and it's the NFL. It's going to be Diggs. They're not getting rid of Allen anytime soon. So Allen really needs to play up to a high standard. I mean, we put him in the same conversation as Mahomes and Burrow. I know Burrow was bad last week, but these are quarterbacks that are really top tier. And Allen, he plays up to those standards, but he also plays at a much lower floor than those two multiple times. I mean, we see Mahomes play bad. He's human, but we don't see him as bad as Josh Allen's bad. And that's going to be an issue going forward, especially on a Bills team that, to put it lightly, hasn't done anything yet. Really, like they have nothing to show for these last couple of years of success. That was obviously their story earlier in their history when they lost 4 straight Super Bowls. I mean, you could write NFL history without those Bills teams and almost be fine, which is pretty disrespectful, but I think you get what I'm saying here. The AFC East is really up for anyone's grabs, and the Bills haven't proven anything. I don't care that they win 12, 13 games. They're not doing anything in the playoffs, and winning the division only means as much as you make it. And with teams like the Dolphins that we've said so much good stuff about, a team like the Jets that, despite Aaron Rodgers, still has this really high ceiling, and a team like the Patriots who, as a Pats fan, I don't think are very good, but they always play division rivals really tough no matter who's on the squad. It's time for the Bills to figure it out. A week 1 loss, you can't overreact too much. I mean, they could still go out and win like the next 9 straight, and then we're talking a lot different, but it's something that's really discouraging. And if I'm a Bills fan, I'm not taking this one lightly. Was a really big game that you were supposed to win, even with a healthy Rodgers. So I don't know. I'm worried about Buffalo going forward. I think they really need to go on a hot streak here to, make guys like us shut up. But there's a lot to be said, and there's a lot going forward that I don't think aligns very well with what Buffalo wants to do.
Yeah, and this team overall, like you said, the division obviously dominated by the Patriots when Tom Brady was there. After that, we saw a few years where the Bills did look like the best team overall. But this year, if the Dolphins are going to play up to those standards, and the Bills are going to play down, we're going to see a lot of competitiveness in this division overall. And these teams always play well against each other in the division, especially in the AFC East. I mean, between the games between the Patriots and the Dolphins and the Bills, overall, all these teams are going to be very solid this year. And the Jets, obviously, there's a lot of questions with them without Aaron Rodgers, but it's going to be a competitive division this year, especially if teams like the Bills kind of play down and the Dolphins play up. But overall, going into next week, there's some big matchups that we'll see. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered by some of these teams. We see the Vikings take on the Eagles on Thursday night. That'll be a fun game to watch. Teams like the Bills taking on the Raiders. The Raiders look solid in the first week. They won that game. Can the Bills come back and kind of show that they are the team who they think they are? The Ravens and the Bengals, that's going to be a good matchup to see both of those teams. Obviously, the Chiefs and the Jaguars, the Chiefs trying to bounce back. And then we have the Browns and the Steelers on Monday night. So we got a lot of good games to look forward to, a lot of teams trying to answer those questions. And hopefully they do. And if they don't, then we'll come on here next week and talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun week one of football, but there's so much left to talk about. So that's why we'll keep coming back for you guys.
And we'll see you next week.
Appreciate it.